Hi all, welcome to educators.com. I'm Harish, software engineer. In this session, we will learn about JavaScript syntax, its scope, and using strict mode in JavaScript. So let's start with JavaScript syntax. The syntax is all about the set of rules defining how programs should be constructed. So the syntax defines the different kinds of rules which you need to follow while writing a specific kind code, like for loops, if conditional statements, or a functions, or declaring a variables, or writing some kind of expressions, etc. Here, JavaScript is case sensitive. Example, here I declared variables but with same name. As in this example, you can check I declared the variable called x with same name, but the case is different. So due to which the JavaScript will consider these two variables as different. JavaScript uses a Unicode character set, which supports all the characters, comma symbols in the world. And in JavaScript, the statements are separated by semicolon. Here, JavaScript follows the automatic semicolon insertion. This means if we don't terminate the line of code using semicolon, it will automatically add the semicolon at the end of line. The main thing here is you should be very careful. The thing is you should not forget to terminate the line of code with semicolon. This means if there will be some kind of white space, if you just ignore adding semicolon, this may lead to some inappropriate results. So you should always terminate the line of code using semicolon. So here are some of the syntaxes to declare variable, for loop, functions, operators, etc. Here in this variable declaration, you can check it out. I declared two variables called sample1 and sample2. And in for loop, here is a syntax like initialization, condition, and then increment, and then the block of code. In the functions, I declared the function using the keyword function and the function name with the parenthesis and then the block of code. In the expressions, here I added two numbers and multiply two numbers and then condition to compare two numbers. So these are some of the syntaxes. We'll be exploring on the syntaxes more in later sessions. So coming to scope. Scope is what we have access to. It refers to the current context of our code. Let's say I declared a variable or a function. So whatever be the function have access to is called its scope. Here the scope is defined in two ways, global scope and local scope. Global is something refers to what we declare on top of all the code. Here, whatever you declared in the global scope, it will be declared at top of all your code. The advantages are one place where we can declare the values that can be accessed across all the pages. Let's say if you want to add some configuration values to your application, which you need to lots we can say like which need to be accessed across all the pages, then you can use this global scope. Second thing is we used to define the plugins or libraries. Here, libraries like jQuery, Angular are been added at the global scope so that it will be available across the pages where they will be used by the user. This means developer. Only one global scope. We don't have multiple global scopes in this application. We will have only one global scope. So whatever you declare within the global scope will be available as properties of Windows object. The disadvantages. The more usage of global scope will lead to misappropriate results. This means you should not use more amount of global scope. That means you should not use global scope to declare multiple variables or more number of functions. Because as you go on declaring these variables or proper functions, it will lead to misappropriate results. So you should be very careful while using global scope. In most of the application, the global scope will be used only for common things and it is maintained at a very lightweight. So it contains only less configuration values, less amount of properties. which will be accessed across all the pages. Coming to strict mode in JavaScript. The strict mode is a way for developer to write the strict variant of JavaScript. This means it is used to write a strict variant of JavaScript where it will make the user to avoid the mistakes. The advantages are it will eliminate the silent errors by throwing errors. This means in normal JavaScript, whatever if there are some of the errors which are ignored, those will be thrown as errors in strict mode. It avoids us from using some JavaScript syntax which will be introduced in the future versions. This means if you use some of the syntaxes which will be later released in the future versions of JavaScript, it will avoid us from using it. And third, it fixes the mistakes which will make the JavaScript difficult for optimization. Due to some errors ignored by normal JavaScript code, it will be difficult for the JavaScript engine to optimize the code, due to which the performance of your application will decrease. So to avoid these mistakes and to improve the optimization, which will in turn improve the performance of your application, we need to use strict mode. So using strict mode of JavaScript, we will be able to write the code which will be well optimized and more compatible with the future versions of JavaScript. And one important thing which you need to take care is, while working with this approach, as some browsers will run the code with different behavior, we need to test the code in all the browsers. We can declare the strict mode at the global scope or at the local scope. Example, here I declared the strict mode at the global scope, which will affect all the code which is written within the page. So, whereas in the local scope, I declared the strict mode within the function. So the strict mode will affect only this function. So these are the advantages. If you want to use the strict mode at a global level, you can use it, or else if you want to use the strict mode at a with local scope or within a function or within a bunch of functions, you can use it. So let's look into some of the errors thrown in the strict mode. Assigning a value to undeclared variable. In normal JavaScript, if you mistype a variable, it will be declared as global, whereas in strict mode, it will throw an error. As you can see here, I declared a full name variable with the value as JavaScript, but I didn't use the var, so this will be considered as an undeclared variable. In normal JavaScript, when you use this kind of syntax, it will be treated as a global variable, whereas in the strict mode, it will throw an error. The second is assigning to a non-writable property. Here, I declared an object and defined a property called full name with the values hello and writable as false. This means the properties is only read-only property. I cannot write the value. Here, I'm trying to assign the value world string to the full name property. This will be ignored in the normal JavaScript, whereas coming to this strict mode, it will throw a type error. Assignment to a getter-only property. Here in the object called sample, I declared a getter-only property called name. So when you try to override the value, it will throw a type error. Using duplicate property names and arguments. Here I declared a function called add with two parameters number1 and number1. As you can check here, I use the same name for these two parameters. When you use this kind of syntax in normal JavaScript, the number1, which is of second argument, will be shadowing the first property. This means whatever value, if you use the number1 value within the function scope, it will be considered as a second parameter. So when you use this kind of syntax in normal JavaScript, it will be allowed, but whereas coming to strict mode, it will throw a syntax error. Attempts to delete undeletable properties. Here we are trying to delete the prototype property which is of predefined object in JavaScript. So when you use this kind of syntax, here in strict mode, it will throw an error. prevents setting properties on primitive values. Here we are trying to add a property to a primitive value, which is not an object. When you use this kind of syntax in normal JavaScript, it will be ignored, whereas in strict mode, it will throw a type error. Let's flip to bracket servo and check the strict mode. Let's declare a variable without using keyword var and try to assign some value. Let's check what the browser says. Here, when I declared the variable without using keyword var, it is throwing a reference error saying global variable is not defined. So you cannot use this kind of syntax in strict mode. Let's check with one other example. Let's try to delete the property of an object. So here it is throwing a type error saying cannot delete property, prototype or function object. So when you try to delete the predefined properties of an object in JavaScript, it will raise an error. Let's try with other example. Here I am declaring an empty object. And here I'm preventing the extension of this object. Let's try to add some property to this object. Here we are trying to add a property to an object which is non-extensible. So let's check it out what the browser says. Here it is throwing an type error saying can't add property, new prop, object is not extensible. So here it will be throwing error in strict mode when you try to extend the property which is non-extensible. So let's try with other example. Here I declared an empty object. Let's try to add a property which is readable. Let's add a value called JavaScript to this property and let's make it as readable. Let's try to override the property with other value. Here you can see it throws a type error saying can't assign to read-only property data property of object. So you cannot override the property which is only readable. So these are some of the errors thrown in strict mode. That's all from this session. Thank you.